Koto, and welcome to this morning's Finance and Performance meeting. Just to note, everyone, that this meeting is being recorded. Right, I'll just open us with our karakia. Heavenly Father, we ask for wisdom, discernment, and your favour as we deliberate on the business of council. Bless our meeting as we work together to improve the lives of the people we serve. We meet to improve our community, to use our resources wisely and well, to represent all members of our community fairly, to make decisions that promote the common good. We recognise our responsibility to the past and the future, and the rights and needs of both individuals and community. As trusted servants, we seek blessings on our deliberations and on our efforts here today. May we act wisely and well. We ask this through Christ. Amen. Right, okay. I'll just call for apologies. I have one here from Councillor Peter Johns and
One for Councillor Ward. She may be attending, but I'll put you now in case.
apologies. Go ahead. Thanks. Councillor Sutherland moved, seconded by Councillor Long. All those in favour, please say aye. And against, carried. Thank you. We don't have anyone here for public forum. Is there any notification of items not on the agenda? Declarations of conflict of interest in regards to today's items of business? There are none. Confirmation of the minutes. Could I have somebody move those as a true and correct record? Sutherland. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Chase. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We'll just go through those. Page 9. Page 11. Okay. Move on to the reports. So a very warm welcome and thank you for the huge effort to be here for the earlier time. So we'll go into the management report and welcome to Sarah Walsh, our financial manager.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. I will take the report as read, and I have, as per usual, our usual sort of standing agenda. I have some friends coming along to tag in and tag out on their subject matter as my subject matter expert. So we'll kick off straight away, going straight into the external funding with Max.
Good morning, everyone. I will take the external funding summary report as read, but there are a couple of things I'd just like to highlight. So the first is that we have fully utilised the $500,000 grant received from the Department of Internal Affairs for the Recovery Office, and we're now starting to tap into the funding we've received from DPMC, and we've received the first tranche of that, of the 450,000 of the full 900,000. The other important thing to note is that the Rural Support Trust finished its funding from MPI, and we are now using some of the DPMC funding to keep them going and providing the rural support leg of the recovery program. And we have that, basically, we've agreed to fund them to the end of December. I guess are there any questions on that?
That's good. Welcome, Councillor Wards. Oh, God. I'm sure that was very good purpose. Councillor Gilmore and then Councillor Wards.
Thanks, Your Worship. So much I could say. I just have two quick questions through you, Mayor Tracy, if that's okay. Looking at the MPI Rural
Communities Fund, I note in the comments, it said that there's a verbal agreement with MPI for an extension. Wondering if, like, how solid that verbal agreement would be, and would it be sensible to get that confirmed in writing?
Through you, Mayor Tracy, I believe it's a very solid, it's a very solid verbal agreement. They've been kept up to date throughout the program, and understand. I mean, it was a relatively short kind of turnaround on that one as well required, but by all means, we can definitely. I'm sure there's something in email, but we can definitely get something written. My understanding is that we're actually nearly finished that project. So, but we can definitely do that to cover ourselves on that one.
Thanks very much, Mayor Tracy. And yeah, that would be. Oh,
That would be helpful. Thank you, Mayor Tracy. My second question is just on the DPMC recovery funding, and noting that we're using some of that for Rural Support Trust, which I think is great. Have we given any consideration, knowing that we've got sort of a fairly big pot there, to be looking at further partnering with other organisations to be delivering some of our recovery stuff? So Rural Support Trust probably being a primary one that I'm thinking of, but again, just making sure we're not at risk of losing any funding. We've got some really great organisations within our district that are really well placed and geared up to be doing that. So just wondering if there's been any consideration.
Through you, Mayor Tracy, probably not a question for the finance staff, but certainly in terms of the recovery office, have transitioned into their new plan in terms of what they will be focusing on. So as far as I'm aware, there's no intentions to partner and like fund other organisations to do any of the sort of work streams, but they are looking at what support they can get to further, I guess, improve their knowledge of the impacts. So they've got some things planned around, providing some good economic data. So they will be looking at that type of activity that hopefully we can use the funding for. So I have committed to the team that I will contact DPMC around that funding, because it is quite stringent in terms of what it can be used for. So we just want to stretch that a little bit to be able to pull in some expert advice, which might not be strictly covered under the current agreement, but I'm pretty confident that it's still serving the same purpose regarding recovery. So there will be a presentation by the recovery team at the council meeting, so they'll be able to go into a bit more detail on that.
Councillor Gilmore, just on that one, the MSD social sector recovery, that one there is the intention is to partner with other organisations for that. So as soon as I know a bit more data, I'll send that out. Councillor Ward.
And apologies for lateness again, Mayor Tracy. Through you, I have a number of questions around the external funding plus the recovery stuff. I'm sure Rural Support are very grateful for the support that's been given, but I know I'm assuming you've partially answered my question, Brian, because it's operational. I'd be keen to understand from your perspective how the plan for going forward looks. I have some concerns about the reputational risk of us not using this money, and would be keen to understand, there's still a lot sitting there that through a whole lot of different aspects is being not fiddled with, it's being altered to fit some potential needs that we're obviously going to find out. There are plans afoot, and I'm pleased that we will be doing it, but will we ever get to a stage, do you think, where we've still got heaps of money sitting there and the definition of recovery is now almost going to be 18 months old?
Yeah, through Mayor Tracy. So I think there are plans to continue utilising that funding through to the end of the year, and I'm sort of looking over at Max and saying that a big chunk of that will be taken out of that funding. There may be still some funding left, but I think with their planning in terms of pulling in some experts, in terms of some more advice and support to our communities, I'm reasonably confident that at some point that funding will be utilised, probably within the next 6 to 8 months. You're correct in assuming that recovery is now stretching into resilience, and I think we can take, and the team will talk about this a bit more, but we've got to still use the opportunities we have with that funding maybe to do a little bit more. And an example around that is the MPI funding for the hubs that were impacted by Cyclone Gabrielle, but what about some of those hubs that weren't impacted? That might be next time. So how do we now stretch it into that? So I think it's, there generally when some sort of disasters do happen, you sort of take that opportunity to explore and actually do something that we may not have been able to do had we not had this funding. So we certainly are stretching the definition of a recovery, but I think if we can sort of do things, get to a place where we're actually more resilient than what we were before Cyclone Gabrielle, that'd be a good thing. But in terms of the funding, I'm looking over at Max to see how much we would actually, where we'd be getting to towards the end of the year.
I think the thing about the DPMC funding, it is the criteria is very narrow and strict, I guess. And so the more we can ask for a variation to fund things that will benefit our district as a whole in recovery, the more we'll be able to utilise it. So at the moment, we're a little bit hamstrung, I would say, on what we can actually spend that money on. And so it's really up to the recovery team and officers, I would say, to be working out the best way to utilise that funding. Personally, I'm the reporter at this point.
Can I just ask you through you, Brian, do recovery, they've submitted budgets to you that go along with their draft recovery plan that sort of show what they might utilise and what they might be looking at?
Not as such, because I think the criteria are so strict that it's really at the moment the fundings that we have left is really to pay salaries and wages. So that's pretty much. So when we've applied for the funding, within those first few months after the cyclone, we needed our recovery structure funded, else that would have landed on the ratepayer. So we definitely push forward saying we don't want this to cost our ratepayer anything. So we've achieved that. So we've got 100% funding to fund these positions and support RST. The first part of the funding was through DIA, and that gave us a bit more scope to be able to do a little bit more around that funding. The second part of that funding was out of a different bucket from DPMC, which really was a lot, as we've said, a lot more restrictive in terms of what. But I'm reasonably confident that with a proposal going to DPMC on how we'll use that funding in a better way with an attached budget around that, we're hopeful that we'll get approval for that.
Thanks, Brian. And I'd be keen to have a little bit more than verbal, only because this government is very much looking at any, funds that they can claw back. So if we can get that strengthened up a bit, that would be great. The agreement on the $450,000. If you can, what part? Sorry, Councillor Gilmore referred to the verbal part of the contract.
That's MPI. So the DPMC contract's definitely an agreement. It's just if I change it, definitely we will get it. Or if I get extended, that will definitely have to be a formal request to go through that.
Councillor Woods and Councillor
Yeah, then it's subsequent, thank you, Mayor Tracy. So in 3.2.3, the Recovery Office will now start to utilise the 450,000. How much went to RST? And therefore, I'm assuming from what you've said, Brian, is that whatever's left from that is going to fund staff costs. Now, depending on how much RST got, that could be quite a lot of money out of 450,000.
So the funding that went to RST was just shy of 167,000 plus GST. 157, sorry. Yeah, 156,210, but plus GST. So deducted from that would be the left of 300K. At this point, that we're only permitted to use that funding to pay for the wages or of staff at this point. Not saying that we're going to pay all that to them in wages, because obviously they've already got their contracts to say what they'll get paid. So what we're saying is that that could allow some room to do other things, because there'll be funding left over as a result of that.
One of the ones they're looking at is potentially an Infometrics report with Brett Olson just around that, so, but I'm not sure if they've got permission for that. And I guess just following on that, sorry, Councillor Chase, the reporting lines for RST back to recovery or back, that's been arranged as well for some accountability on those funds, or?
Yeah, through Metro. So there is an agreement that RST will need to report back on their achievements, because obviously we will need to report that back to DPMC in terms of those activities, plus anything the actual recovery team is doing as well. Yep.
Councillor Chase.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Tracy. So am I correct that this is only the first half of the 9,000? Are we at risk if we aren't able to show how we're going to spend that money if we do the second tranche of that money?
No, I don't think we are at risk. So there is an agreement in place to provide that funding to us. If we were to close our recovery office down and obviously said that's it, then that funding would go back, and they'd likely repurpose that funding to say Masterton or someone else to use. So the only risk would be if we decided that we didn't need it, then we would have to hand it back at that point.
Councillor Wallace.
Tracy, I'm picking up on that, yeah, because it was the beginning of your speech there, Brian. I got out of it no certainties, right, because of the situation of the way it's described. But is it a bad thing that we seem to have this fixation that we've got money, so we've got to spend it? In my personal view, hurricanes aren't going away because we've had one. We're going to have many more. Look what happened in the last 2 days. Everyone was really scared, which is a good thing. We've changed we're making this paradigm shift to think that it will happen again, just when. So I think we want to think carefully. If we've used the funds to the best of the ability, and I think that's the key here, to the best of the ability that we can expel those funds to, so be it. If we send something back, because just because we've got money, we don't have to spend it. And that, I think a lot of people fall in that trap. And also it could put us in good light, because the powers that be will be. This government is there, not because of, they're there for reasons to govern our country. And I think we have to be also aware of that.
Tracy, I think personally, I think we'd be crazy to give any funding back that's given to the district. I don't think this district has received a lot of external government funding over the years, and if we can utilise that funding in one way that improves our resilience to our community, then we should be using it. Because I can tell you now, if we do hand it back, Masterton will do what we'll probably get it and do exactly what we were planning on doing anyway. So I think this is not ratepayer funding, and there's a lot of funding that does go out to councils when there is events, and people will try and organisations will try and build back better. There's a number of examples where there have been events that places are better now than what they were prior to those events. But the team aren't sitting on their hands either. So the team has got plans to do stuff between now and to the end of the year. The team has reduced the numbers from the initial recovery structure that was put in place at the very start. And I think we just be careful not to get ahead of ourselves, because the recovery team will be presenting in a week about all the great work they've done, and all the great work that they plan on doing. So I think the risk of losing that money, or us, there's no intention for me or the recovery to shut up and hand that money, shut up shop and hand that funding back. I personally think that would be crazy to do that.
Supplementary, that wasn't the question. That wasn't what I was asking. I was just saying, I'm not criticising any of that. What I'm just saying is that we've just got to be wary of what we do. And I'm not saying that they haven't done it, but under what the messenger just said, it's the strict criteria in which it's already put out. So what you're actually saying is that you're going to rejig it so we can get it all, and there won't be anything left. What is your opinion? It's only an assumption. It's not a fact.
Yeah, I think we've got to attempt to extend the criteria and how we can use that, because it is. But the team have a plan on what they're going to be working on over the next sort of 6 to 8 months. That there will be an end date to recovery. And certainly when that funding, before the funding runs out, we will be exiting out of recovery. So that's not far away, if I was to be perfectly honest, but it's not right now either. So there's no risk on losing the current funding we have unless we choose to.
Councillor Gilmore, then Councillor Franklin.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and thanks for all of that information, Brian. I think this conversation's morphing a little bit into sort of future of recovery as opposed to funding. So I guess I just wanted to clarify from you, Brian. I'm really pleased to see that we will have a report coming to the next council. Will that be an opportunity to have a fulsome discussion on future of recovery direction and how that's meant to be looking? I know you were talking about a presentation of achievements, but I do think that this council does need to have a discussion about the way forward.
Yeah, through Metro. So yes, they will be talking about also what they're planning on doing in terms of the next 6 months. The recovery in terms of is actually a legal thing we're doing. So the recovery manager is a legal position through the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Act. So while we have a recovery office, we have other requirements that we must meet, similar to when a controller responds to an event. Recovery is exactly the same in terms of that. So even though council does have we employ the staff, so council clearly has it does sit a little bit separate because it's in response to an event. It's not something we would be doing on a every year basis. So in terms of the direction setting, I guess the direction setting is limited to what it would be across other council activities that I guess I'm trying to say here. And they will present a plan that they work, they've got a plan and gone through it, and sort of got a lot of questions myself in terms of the work plan to make sure that any work that they're doing is with purpose or has a purpose. So that's been I've shared that clearly with them. But we are getting to the stage where recovery, when we transitioned out of response, was we did some really critical stuff we had to do. We had roads blocked 18, not quite 18 months, but 15 months later. What they're doing now does move into the more the nice to haves rather than the critical aspects. So the work that they're doing, while it is still important, and it's good. It is, to be fair, nice to have. And I've been really honest with them about that. And they've been honest about that as well. If this wasn't externally funding, would council fund what they're about to do over the next 6 months? The answer would be no, because we've got to look at the value to the ratepayer. But does it still provide value to our community? Absolutely. So there's still a value element to it. It's just that it's not as critical that it was. So in terms of that, it is moving into a stage of look, what else can we do now? And that hub example that council probably wouldn't fund that at the moment under the current financial pressures. If we can get funding through externally to do another 3 or 4 hubs, brilliant. We should do that as well. So we are stretching and extending beyond it to try and just do probably some good rather than absolute necessities. What's necessary and critical still is our roading. So that part of the recovery will continue, but that will continue under the alliance rather than within the recovery office. So I hope that sort of just gives you a bit of a picture of where we're heading.
Thank you, Worship. I think what we're forgetting to factor in here is, what does recovery actually mean? And it means lots of different things to different people. However, in the broader sense of it, we have to remember that whilst we think we see recovery happening, really what goes on behind closed doors we don't see. And I think an act of returning to normal is kind of like a broad definition of it, but actually it's a coordinated effort and process to bring about immediate, medium and long-term holistic regeneration of a community. And I don't believe that we know we're actually at that point as yet. I mean, following an emergency like this that we've never been through before, it hasn't impacted on any of us personally. So I don't think we can actually wrap recovery into a box and say this is what it is, because I think there's long-term impacts, including mental health issues. And if we've got the funding and it's available from the government, I think we would be. And let's face it, we've been held up as a very good example of how we handled this emergency at the time and since then. And I think we need to be seen to be still carrying on in that vein. And if the funds are available and we find good use for it, then I'm in favour of certainly carrying on. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Franklin. Just in that council report, I know that there is the draft recovery plan. When does that get that final approval and get shared out?
I'm not too sure, actually. I'll need to check on the timelines around that. I know they're probably waiting on a few things from me, so I might be holding that up. So I'll need to get on with that one.
That really good discussion. Thank you, everyone. Councillor Wards.
Just in case, Tracy, you're moving on to the next topic, because it does come under recovery. I've spoken with Mayor Tracy about this, but wondering where would be the forum for an update on the mayoral relief, because that's part of recovery as well. So will it be through council pay?
Oh, sorry. So council paper and that following on with the same sort of line. So through full council. I've got a lot of work to do this afternoon on it. No. Just writing the paper and giving those stats. So the intention is just to give the total figure, but actually show the number of people that were supported. And I think in the last application where we opened the fund up, whilst it looked like we had a lot of money, the need was just so great over so many, and it'll be interesting to see just what that looks like. year. And I've also asked, the team produced a very good map. I thought the map that they used in the MPI, report around the On Track Fund was very, very good, as it mapped out exactly just how widespread that damage is. And just talking to Mitch yesterday, I wondered whether, we could highlight actually where that high level damage was, sort of on those funds. And I just thought that would provide a bit of a good map too. So I've asked for that to be part of that report as well. Hey,
Could I just mention that Alison, no, we were affected, so. She said everyone around this table wasn't, but I was.
I was going to note because Councillor Woods was pretty close in that community. So it did impact, and we all know people very well, and still probably supporting them. Right, I do have some questions on the Better Off funding. Let you move on to that one. Is that all right? Is that you still, Mac? Okay.
Better Off funding, I guess the overall funding package hasn't changed, but what has happened is the reallocation of some of the budget. So basically the play and recreation strategy, which had been allocated, I guess 1.75 million, 1.5 of that has now been reallocated to local water done well, and also the funding for the council reserves has been of 250,000 has also been transferred to local water done well.
Thanks. Right. Before I ask mine, Councillor Ward's, Councillor Gilmore.
Thanks, Mayor Tracy. Are we doing this line by line or overall? Because I've got questions on at least 2, 3 of those.
I'm happy for it to do it line by line, because mine I want to reference the play and active recreation, and some questions that I'm asking.
I'll just go for it then. Digitisation and e-services. We've got a
Mic on.
Oh, sorry, Metro. Yeah. We've got staff costs to date, but nothing in there. And I remember Mike Dunn saying at one of his recent papers, he hinted that we were going to need more money into that. Why are you smiling, Sarah? We're going to need more money into that particular project in order to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. So I'm a little concerned that we've got staff costs to date, and we haven't received any funds for that. I'm also concerned a little bit and want to ask about the iwi building capacity. We've spent $135,000 on what? And what are the outcomes are we expecting from this? Because I have a question through you, Mayor Tracy, to Brian. I know it's operational and we don't need to be digging into the operational budgets, but do we have, as well as this, do we have a funding code for, I know in the early days we talked about ensuring that iwi sat around this table, and I'm assuming their presence during LTP was do we have a funding line operationally as well as this? And if so, what are there differences in the outcomes we're expecting, and how are we monitoring that? There's a lot of head shaking going on here.
I think we were all fighting over who wanted to answer it. Through you, Your Worship, I can tackle a couple of these. I'm no subject matter expert, but with regards to the last question you asked around the iwi representation around the table for our meetings, yes, there is another operational budget that has these costs factored in. We have just completed an exercise looking into this and checking what sort of is happening, and I guess that's a piece of work that might potentially come to elected members at some point. With regards to the Better Off funding that we've got building iwi capacity, there is a separate contract in place for the utilisation of this And my understanding, and I'm sorry, Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is around providing support for RMA staff or enabling RMA staff to train up to be able to better help with the district, I guess, and with what changes are happening. So that is under a separate contract, and there is performance measures in place and reporting requirements as part of that. So that funding is completely separate from their attendance within the meetings. Around the digitisation, this is where I know a little bit, but Brian, do you want to save me, please?
Through you, Tracy. So the digitisation, the first part of this work is obviously digitising our records. So currently we are utilising a staff member to do that. In fact, we were starting to do this prior to even this project being started. We are about to shift to a different way of doing that because we might present, he was quite right with currently how we're doing it. It will take potentially years to complete because there's thousands and thousands of records that we'll be going out shortly around procuring a service to do this so we can get it done a lot quicker, so it can then allow us to move into some of the I guess the customer side of things in terms of accessing those records. So there will be a procurement plan in place to procure organisations that do this, that have done this type of work previously, to engage them, and that will be utilised out of this funding. So we'll be going to the market shortly on that.
So what did we spend $135,000 on in the building capacity for Iwi?
That is per the contract we have in place with both iwis, and that is the support we're providing them to bring staff up to speed, I guess, in the RMA space.
Their staff.
Yes.
A lot of the work, as Sarah said, was around the RMA, so but more the TIO environment type office. So that was to support them, to support us. So that's reduced our cost in terms of a lot of that engagement we have at more of that environmental level around the consents or any through stuff that Dave's been working on and other sort of activities where we're building up their resources and the relationship between our staff and their staff. So that's where that funding's sitting. So I think it works out to be around $10,000 a month per iwi.
Sorry, I was just thought I would add, and Max will be better off to jump in and help me out in this space. The funding that we have received to date, when we've received that funding, we were allowed to put in an application for 10% of our overall Better Off package. We have allocated it internally to these two projects. That doesn't necessarily mean that's where it should stay. And as we come into the year end, Max is busy working away on reports and things like that, and we'll be putting in another claim because we can claim retrospectively what we've spent in each of these sort of categories. So we'll be making sure that come year end we sort of come in nice and neutral. Is that a fair explanation, Max?
Yes, that's right. I think with a lot of these contracts, they say you can invoice them for your first 10% or whatever, which is what we've done. And then I understand now that it's basically we are able to claim costs as we incur them.
Just to highlight to you, Councillor Wards, I've asked to have a deep dive into those budgets, and I've been provided with those, but I've actually asked some further questions, and it's just around the bundling of those because I can't quite clearly see that at the moment myself. So I've asked Sarah just for a bit further information. So we'll bring that back because I think there's in essence, I think two things for me is one around transparency. Well, there's three. One around transparency. The second around highlighting highlighting to the community the benefit and what is there, but also where to after those 2 years when that funding is there. And I'm just keen to understand the RMA space as to what, what advice is on charged as part of those consents and what is learning. So quite a bit more work to do there. And the other one for me was around the project management office, when obviously part of their funds is, or part of their costs is attributed to that as well. So I was keen to understand that, and I think I first started asking those questions around the pahia to a pool. So keen to have a look at that. So happy to share that and continue to bring that back to the table. Yeah, Councillor Gilmore.
Thanks very much, Mayor Tracy. And just wholeheartedly before I jump in, I agree with that. I've also asked for some information around those budget lines. And I think we do have to be transparent. There's actually a high level of public interest as well. And there's already some comments flying around. So I'm actually making sure that transparently we're able to lay that out to dispel any sort of myths and the like. My specific question, it was going to what Max was just talking about before about incurring the cost and then invoicing. And there is quite a large gap at the moment. So, we've got our 80,000 versus we've spent 135, 20,000 a month from what Brian was talking about. That's quite a few months, obviously, that we've incurred costs and we haven't claimed it back. I suppose my question is, why are we incurring such large amounts of costs without claiming them back? And then just my supplementary to that is, are there any sort of interest costs or other implications involved in us paying out sums of money and not having it on hand? I mean, obviously we can't just make up the money. So are there interest implications? And if there are, does that come out of the budget?
I'll do part one for you, and Sarah can talk about interest. So of the total funding we've received so far, 380,000, and total spent 385,000. So I guess I took a higher level approach as opposed to a program level approach, but definitely have our eyes firmly on this and basically we have a plan in place to. Thank you.
Through your worship, on the interest costs, I guess if we were in a position where your funds received and your funds spent were in quite a disproportion to what they are, then yes, we would look to do something similar. We have done it on previous ones as well, where I think it was within, in the initial recovery phase, I think it might have been a Colin budget where he got funding for local businesses that went out. So we had to factor in interest because one of the requirements was that funds went into a separate bank account. So yes, we would look to do something should it become disproportionate.
Thanks, Mayor. Just quick follow-up. That's reassuring to know that we can look at it as a total funding pool and we're not having to look at that line by line. Just my last question on it's an overall comment about, looking at the play and recreation strategy, etc. We received, I think through Mayor Tracy, and can't quite remember exactly where we've seen it, but we did see an indication that the government was re-looking and reviewing again the better off funding packages. And I know we made we did a slight change of direction when we had a very early indication, and my understanding is there's been some other indications that we may be forced to spend more on the local waters done well. Do we have any sort of other information on that? Is there a risk to some of these other projects, or because I'd just hate for us to be spending a whole lot of money, staff time, if potentially we're forced to move them over? So through to Brian.
Premier Tracy, I mean, that's a really good question, and you're absolutely right. There has been really the government's direction and through DIA, their officials are really pushing for the funding to be where possible to be spent in the three water space. I know, speaking to other CEs, that certainly with their contacts with DIA, they've been asking a lot of questions around it. I'm not aware of any of them being directed to change though. So I know a couple of Cs did dig their toes in and said because of the process and their involvement with iwi and others that it would damage their relationship if they were to change it now. So they said, okay, we accept that. But I still think if priority should still remain with three waters is what's coming through with that, and where possible that funding should be redirected.
And then I'll go to Councillor Sutherland and I'll probably.
Thank you, Worship. Sorry, I just wanted to add on to it. I think because I've had a question around what this fund is going to be utilised for. So I just thought I'd talk about it. I was planning to talk about it further in when we get to the quarter report, but now seems like the perfect opportunity. So I've spoken to the staff around the Better Off funding that we have put direct to the PARS. So of the 250, we have got the 50,000 that we have separated for around the Dannevirke Multi-Sport Complex Committee. Correct me, apologies if that's not quite right. The other 200,000 we have earmarked for work around our parks and our reserves. When I've spoken to the team, they're in the process of doing a prioritisation matrix at the moment, but effectively this fund will be spent on our playgrounds that when we do get to the quarter report, you'll see one of our service performance measures is around playground equipment, safe for use and fit for purpose. This measure is not met. We have quite a bit of work that needs to be done within our playgrounds, and this is what the team are earmarking this funds for. Not all playgrounds are not up to standard, but some are, and the work and the cost around that's where this funding is planning to be utilised. So just to add a little bit more context, and it's all prioritisation is from what was the projects listed within the PARS strategy.
Thanks, Sarah. Just before I go to Councillor Sutherland, I consider the health and safety of our parks to be part of our duty and part of our responsibility. So I did request that information around what that money was being utilised for rather than nice to have. So whilst I understand that's not a nice to have, that's actually a core function of this council. But I'd also highlight that in local water done well, there are many areas that we are certainly well and truly under. Councillor Sutherland.
Thanks, Mayor Tracy. Yeah, I've been giving this some thought too, but when I saw the further on in Sarah's report, we did get a report about our playgrounds and things that were in a pretty grim state, health and safety wise. So I guess there's a duty there to do something, isn't there? Close them or fix them, some of them. Just two things really quickly, just to Brian through yourself. The digitisation, we're going down a plan for doing the record trips, is right. We did have a general discussion about the use of that money in other areas as well, but at this point of time, Brian, the 600 grand, we're going to focus on trying to do the record digitisation of records at this point. That's the main idea of utilising that 6, is it? We'll see. All once you've got the contract cost back and this sort of thing.
Yes, you are correct. And then as a result of that, then those we can then, before we can actually have the public coming online and searching through, we have to get those records in, and then, but it's once they're in, so reasonably, I don't want to say straightforward because someone will say that's wrong, but then there is a process to actually make those records available to our community. But it's not just those building records. We are looking at cemetery records, and there's a wide range of other records as well. And to be honest, we're probably one of the few councils where this is not available online. So this is bringing us in line with others in the modern world.
Just secondly, Mayor Tracy, possibly not quite the place for this discussion, but with local waters well done with this money, I'm not sure how far down the track, but that was quite a significant report and discussion the other day at the ICM meeting, and we're going into having a strategic look at this, and I can see probably a need to sit down, and maybe there might be some need for some funding to really lift our game in the three waters. I think I'm just looking ahead and thinking we're in that, where I could see that the government are already forcing us to take this pretty seriously and come up with a plan, and we need a plan for ourselves. And I can just see some extra costs, and I'm sure there are costs coming through. Someone made a comment, might have been you, Tracy, that about some extra cost done, such extra cost, but this is more looking at the report from Rationale the other day, and I was quite very impressed with that bloke's approach. And I'm thinking this is not really the discussion place here for that. I'm thinking, is there a way of just supporting our three waters and maybe looking at that, and maybe our committee that's going to have a look at strategically, that might be part of that, perhaps. I'm just thinking there might be some need. We might not have identified the 1.7 million. I'm sure there may be enough in there to do what I'm thinking, but that's all for the moment. A lot of place.
I think if I had the Three Waters team here, they'd be nodding their head and would take every cent extra that they could get over the next couple of years. And we know the challenges with that, but equally, you're probably looking at other areas saying, but I think if there's important work to do, then as a council, it's sort of figuring out which bucket to take it from in terms of this. So it is a real push of the government to say, because when they I think it goes back to when this fund was established and the Better Off Support funding went to councils. That was always going to be held as debt against the three water assets, but that was sort of saying, here you go, a bit of a, what's the word? Yeah, I'm trying to think of a politically correct word. It was to make everyone feel a bit better at the time. And then once these entities were set up, then those entities would hold the debt that was created, the 2.5 billion or whatever it was, against those entities. The new government will be thinking, well, if we're going to be holding this debt, we'd rather hold it against where it was going to come out of anyway, which was the three waters. So that's what I'm guessing their position is around this. So if we can utilise, we've got some really good important projects in there, and I'd hate to see some of those disappear. But if there's funding available because what we're finding every day is another expense in relation to three waters. A week ago was sludge that's unbudgeted, and then in another month's time there's going to be Woodville water. Who knows? So whatever we can get certainly will go to good use.
Thanks. And I guess it was after the presentation by Rationale that, I started asking, actually, we've got a limited number of staff in Three Waters, a lot to achieve, what could make that go faster or what could help that team. So that sort of jogged me into that thinking as well. So I'd be very keen to see that prioritisation list and just understanding that a little bit more. Councillor Gorman.
Thanks very much, Mayor Tracy. I suppose, and I'm not in any way trying to relitigate the decision that council made of where funding was allocated to. I was always in support of putting as much as we can into the waters space. However, I'm quite keen to, and it might not be for this meeting, but to really understand what the risk is of the government moving into a directive mode of saying, actually, you can't do the nice to haves because water is the hot button issue. And I suppose if there is at all a risk of that happening, perhaps we do need to give some consideration to where we're putting it in before we're burning staff time, which we know is a real challenge for our council, but we're burning staff time on projects that are at risk of not happening because the government is going to force us to put the waters money into water. So I just wonder if we do need to, probably not for this meeting again, but get some advice on whether that is at all likely and work out if there is an appetite for us to to do that before we're forced to. Because my personal opinion is I think that it is going to come to a crunch. We're getting indications and letters that this is the strong preference. All it takes is one more letter to say, do it. And I could see that happening.
Brian, can you, you did ask some questions and yeah, that directive didn't come back, but my understanding is that it would be a bad look to be having non-compliances and less action in your waters and putting funding towards health and safety requirements on parks, which is actually a fundamental core part of our job anyway, and does have to be done. But Brian,
Yeah, through Metro. So I don't know the answer to that, to be perfectly honest, Councillor Scott, but the contacts I've had with DIA officials is pretty much what I've said. Where you can repurpose it, you should be doing that. And I know councils, some have said we're not, too late, sorry. We've already got agreements in place, and they haven't come back and said, well, you're going to have to. So all I know is that there's, they may be in different part of the process. I guess if you're committed to things like that, it's going to be pretty hard to get out of those, because you're going to. So yeah, I don't know if the government will come and change that, but at this stage, there's a strong preference that it is for three waters where possible.
One very final question, Mayor Tracy.
And thanks for that, and I totally understand if there's contracts signed. Some of our projects that we still have allocated do not have contracts signed at the moment. I just want to double check that that's the case. So our TDC play and recreation strategy, our digitisation of e-services, for example, do they have contracts signed? I know our future urban design probably does, because there's already progress happening. I think building iwi capacity does, but I'm just trying to work out, when you're giving that information of if it's possible we should, what is possible and what we've got, and then I guess my next question is, should we?
Through me, Tracy, the digitisations, I think in terms of not an official contract now has been signed to do the digitisation. We have exhausted, I think, through staff time and resourcing in relation to that. I think when I said contracts, that was just one thing. There would be other factors that other council would say that they're, in agreement. But I mean, the decision still remains for this council, really. If there are outstanding funds, even if half of it was with contract, but it's really up to this council to decide should any more of those funds be rediverted to water. At the moment, there's resolutions in place. There was an appetite to change, then we would, in terms of process, bring back an item to council saying that those current resolutions will be rescinded and the new ones put in place. So in terms of PARs, I'm not aware of any. I think in terms of the 50,000 skate park, I think that's pretty much committed. But beyond that, it's still up to council, has every right to change that again.
thanks, Councillor Gilmore. Just having a quick flick forward into parks and reserves, what the teams come back with doesn't really align with those service performances I'm reading them. So it's really the councillors when you want to have that discussion. Yep. Yeah.
Reserves, basically it's the national standards, not sort of directly health and safety matters. So national standards would say parks need a rubber mat rather than, and so when we do an assessment, the assessment's done against the standards. Obviously a kid falling off is more likely to break their arm on it. So it's not necessarily something we would need to close parks for unless it was a really serious risk. So it's basically saying the national standards, if we were to build a park now, would be built to standards. A lot of councils are bringing their up to speed, but they don't have to be brought up to speed by a date, but it's the sort of moral obligations, how long we want to do this over a period. The worst first probably, and then look at the others after that.
Councillor Johns.
Actually, well, I think Brian's just answered my question. I was going to say that if it's a health and safety issue, then it becomes a necessity to fix up playground equipment and so on. But if it's not, you've handled it. Yep.
That would be on us and out of current budgets. And if there was something so urgent, I would expect that that was, dealt with too immediately. Brian, procedurally, where do you want this conversation and this decision? Do you want something brought back to have this? Because I think there is enough concern around the table.
I'm just trying to, like, because we're currently actually going through the finance, in terms of the finance, I think it might be maybe a discussion sort of outside of this item that we would then go, is there an appetite to, and what is it? Is it everything? Is it PARS? Is it, and maybe just a conversation.
Go to a quick show of hands and see where that lies, just on how people are feeling around that funding. Because again, I don't want the team going back doing too much work. But if it's around the health and safety and requirements, then that work's going to be carried out regardless. So can I just get a quick show of hands? How many people are feeling that that money should be redirected and want Brian to bring something back around that?
I was of that thought too, Mayor Tracy, but I do recall the report that came to us. It wasn't just upgrading, it was significant. I had a feeling that they were in very poor condition. A lot of our, like, significantly bad, and it wasn't just a rubber map underneath it. So I've reflected on that this morning a little bit. But as much as I'd love to get more money into the Three Waters for sure, because that suits me down to the ground. But maybe we can say that. I suppose we can all put our hands up. We probably need to.
Yeah, I'd expect that in a, sorry, Councillor, I'd expect that in a paperback from Brian. I'm just not getting the detail, and because I'm not getting the detail, that's making me question even further. So, what does that look like? Because we have a responsibility in those parks, undoubtedly, and one that sounds quite urgent. But without that information, and when that work was carried out, the things that were immediate were dealt to by the facilities manager at that stage. Councillor Peter Weber.
I think when they had that health and safety people come in and do all our parks, it was a lot more than what we'd budgeted for. It was quite. I think they were quite shocked at actually to get back up to standard. It was actually probably more than what they'd budgeted for in the normal operational budget. That's the impression I got.
The challenge with that is as these teams were going through their budgets, that wasn't budgeted for. That was just because they saw that funding opportunity there. But at the same token, they haven't acted very quick on it either, with not having that prioritisation ready.
I think there was 1 point something million available at one point. And I think that was potentially where they were thinking would be utilised to use. And I think that's just shifted now. And you're not wrong. I think if we need to do it, we would still look at putting that back in sort of budgets through, for an annual plan or something like that as well. So I think I could be wrong, but that's my sort of assumption I'm making, that it was covered within potentially the 1 point, whatever it was.
I'll just go to Councillor Franklin, but I think Brian, if something comes back to us just with some more information around that, so that a clear decision can be made and then people aren't wasting any time. But we also know exactly what we need to carry out in both those spaces. Councillor Franklin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question. Has there been any discussion with other councils about how they've handled this around the region, maybe?
The parks or the better off funding. yeah, I have spoken with other CEs, so some are changing, some aren't. It just, everyone's at different everyone's a little different and the projects are different. Some councils have one project where they're spending their whole amount. Yeah, we're all sort of different at different stages as well. So it's difficult. Yeah.
And I guess, where the passion comes from is very seldom do we get an amount of money come into this district that actually we get to make a difference with, and it's our duty to make sure that that's going to the right place. And go back to one of my favourites, and that's data drives good decisions. So if we can get that back, that would be awesome. Right. Sorry, Councillor Shane.
Can I just ask, what are we getting back? Did we vote for that we wanted to reclaim the money, or?
Or let's bring some information back around exactly what does need to be done, that prioritisation matrix and within the parks and reserves of what needs to be done. And then that way we can make a good decision and one that's final that they can proceed with. But I just don't think there's enough information around what that is, for $200,000. Other funding, unless anyone's got anything further on Better Off, we've done that.
Great, we're moving on.
Finally, under the other funding, we just received some new funding from the Tourism Infrastructure Fund of $110,000, and that's for the installation of a Poomaloo unit at Waihi Falls. And that project is underway.
Thanks for that, Maxine. Councillor Peter-Weber.
Saw that food secure communities. I guess everyone else I didn't know about the Dennyville Community Garden. Is that just because they want to utilise that whole 50K that's come about?
So I've spoken to Colin, who kind of oversaw this project, although my understanding is that it was a community-led project. We ended up kind of being the banker for it because they didn't have an entity that could receive the funding. So basically, of the funding, 38,000 has been spent, and then so Colin went back and said, right, we've spent the 38,000, we need to return the balance to you. And they apparently came back and said, well, what can you spend that on? Is there anything further in that project? And yes, there were two recommendations, I think, in that project. And one was to fund the legal setting up of the food, I think it's the Tararua Kai Collective, actually setting it up as under a trust or something or other, incorporated society. And they said, yes, that would be good use of that funding. And from my conversations with Colin, the remainder of that funding to be used kind of via REAP to establish the Dannyvert Community Garden.
The councillors, I did ask for a copy of the report that we would have had to submit through for that funding. So I've got that in my inbox just to have a look at. And I guess I just wanted to check that it didn't cross over with the social sector funding. So I've got some more questions around that. Councillor John.
Tracy, how much money are we talking to establish an incorporated society? Because it doesn't cost anything to do that.
$30.
Yes.
My understanding is it's legal fees, a lawyer or someone or an accountant. To be honest, it's not my project, but that's what, it's not our project. So a lawyer or some, I guess they have to have a trustee if it's going to be a trust or constitution or whatever. So there will be some professional fees involved in that. But not substantial, I wouldn't imagine.
$1,000.
No, I don't believe so.
I'll circulate that, that final report and we can have a look into that councillor Wards.
Just in the wider context, Mayor Tracy, I'm glad councillor Erin has brought it up, is who made the decision to do this? You know, we were the banker back in the day because that project came out of, you know, our first lockdown and the sense of concern around make sure that we had future-proofed some of our food secure options. But yeah, I'm a little bit gobsmacked that this is the decision that they've come to use up the last of the money. When I saw that, I thought, well, there goes the Dannevirke Community Board project, really, isn't it? If that's what they want to do. But I'm very concerned as to who made that decision. And that's what they're going to spend it on, because we all know from past experience with a lot of our community-led activities around these things that there's a hiss and a roar at the start, but without the long-term infrastructure being put in place, which 17,000 wouldn't cover. I know, I'm a bit worried about that.
Councillor Wards, and look, I can't tell you who the members are either. So, collective's purpose or what the entity is. So I'll have a wee look into that. And the reason I want to is because none of us want double ups and anything that's just ineffective. So, but I was surprised to see it because obviously the Dannevirke Community Board, I would have thought would have been part of that or we would have heard it through REAP. Councillor Wallace, then Councillor Johns.
I might be nicking Peter's thunder. I'll just see the word communities, that's plural. And we're talking singular. So how does that work?
We don't know, but I presume if I remember back to, I'm just thinking about a presentation that was made by Emma Elliott that talked about Kai over the whole district. So they have looked at community gardens and bits over the whole, and there was some work done around the cyclone recovery with some fruit trees, I think at Herbertville and bits, but that's where I think the communities plural comes in. But the Dannevirke Community Garden is, Dannevirke doesn't have one right now, but then neither does Northwood.
It's a supplementary that I can see that money being gobbled up really quick.
Pardon? It's gone.
It's gone. They said there's 38, there's a balance left. Is that right?
12,000, they gave you 12,000 set up. So.
I'm confused now.
Yeah. To clarify, it is community led, so it's not council. Councillor Johns, and we'll look into who.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Tracy. I recall when Emma Elliott came here and we had the discussion about community gardens, and I made a comment that it's been done before on a couple of occasions and they all fail. They're one of those things that they sound great and isn't it, you know, wonderful idea, but they fail. And I think, you know, okay, the money's been spent, so there's not much point talking about it, but it's something for future councils to look at. You know, if somebody wants to set up a garden, will set up a garden, but don't come running to council to pay for it.
Okay. Either they would have secured this. Councillor Woods, you said through COVID, this was secured from government by the community. So I'll have a look at the final report and I should be able to work out who the players are. If you want a copy of that, let me know. Okay. Councillor Franklin.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm concerned about what the 38,000 actually went to, how it was spent. That's a lot of money to set up a plan.
Oh.
To a community garden is a huge success. Totally community driven, fundraised by Explore Pahiatua. Yes, they do have the advantage of being an incorporated society, and we certainly didn't spend $12,000 setting that up. So I'd be questioning the 38,000. I'd like to see a breakdown of how that was spent.
It may be in the report, I'm not sure, so.
The only reason it's in the report is that they've had to send the funds somewhere, so we've just been the bank. No decision making around the funding or where it went or how it went. And in fact, they probably do want to reach out to council, be more involved, but at this point, we're not getting involved at all.
And I just had one, the IAF Pahia tour, is there any, this is probably through the chief executive, any agreement on the iwi contribution to that project being made yet? Oh, just on the IAF Pahia tour, new housing infrastructure, there was going to be a contribution there. Just wondered if that agreement had been sorted.
Through your worship, I understand that Peter Wimsett and Hamish going to be a meeting and looking to get that signed up. So not yet, but yes, looking to get it in writing and agreed as soon as we can.
Councillor Peter Weber and then Councillor Gilmore.
Sorry, just a quick one. Just with is there any risk with the Kāinga order funding with the government changes? No, because we've already spent the money, but we won't get it till next month.
Through you, me, Tracy. We have made a progress payment, and it's really just our last bit of funding that we're about to, there's no, I don't believe there's any risk in getting the last tranche paid.
Gilmore.
Just wanted to, you talked about the IAF Pahia tour funding and made a comment about the iwi contract being signed. Can I just double check, have we spent a substantial amount? I know that there's a heap of Kāinga funding in there as well, without having contracts signed by all parties looking at delivering the work, or have I misunderstood that comment?
Yeah, my understanding there is a tripartite agreement has been signed between iwi, council and Kāinga.
So another hot topic, our borrowing headroom.
Thank you, Your Worship. Last night when I was reviewing and making notes as to where I sort of wanted to tackle today, I've noticed I've done a faux pas on page 17 of your agenda, and you'll see I've pasted an identical table to the one from page 16. So my sincere apologies for that.
You wanted to emphasise the points.
I really did. No, when I met with Raj and I met with Mayor Tracy earlier on the week just to discuss the agenda and how it was landed, I guess, is this headroom piece gives a little bit of false security around our existing limits. And I really wanted to just stress that this is a false security around our existing limits. When we get to the quarter report, you'll see our CapEx program at 31 March is sitting around 50% delivered. So our borrowings are slightly less because we haven't had the need for the borrowings to occur yet. So if I had included the correct table, which I will recirculate, and I apologise I didn't have it sooner, if we were to deliver the CapEx program to an 80% completion rate and factoring in our year one's borrowings at the existing limits from the 21-31 long-term plan, we would be in breach by 1.1 million. So I will circulate the correct table, and my sincere apologies again for that error. This is obviously one of my favourite subjects, and I'm a little bit odd in that space. I know that. So rather than me just harp on about it, is there any questions? Because it is something I can talk about all day.
How did you make a mistake?
I think I just copy pasted and I didn't do the same snip. I don't know what I did. I'm so sorry.
Councillor Wards.
Thanks, Mayor Tracy. You're not alone in being excited about this topic, Sarah. So what you've just told us then, there's two questions in my mind. We're being shown figures that are looking at a 50% completion of our CapEx, no?
So
It's 90%. Well, that for a start is a worry.
So the figures that are showing is at 31 March are based on our borrowings that we've got as at 31 March. So they're correct. The only table that is missing is what I've said to you is if we factor in what we look like at the current limits, is we would be in breach with year one.
So the second question to that then through you, Mayor Tracy, is if we're going to be in breach at 80%, what is it that we're going to have to leverage to bring it back to be, and what are we going to lose in terms of Brian's already furrowing his brow, so I don't think my question is added to.
Through you, Your Worship, this has been tackled within our financial strategy, within the long-term plan, with our change in limits, with our change in what we're looking to implement with the financial strategy for the next 10 years. So when we do this work, we factored this into the long-term plan, and with the proposed changes, we will be fine until we get to year 5, which is what we're aware of and we've talked about, and we have the plans in place to look to rectify that as we sort of go along. But I guess the financial strategy looks at us completing 100% of our CapEx program, and we have to be prudent. We have to factor that in. It wouldn't be prudent for me to sit here and tell you that we can afford a CapEx program if I haven't done the calculations at 100%, because something might happen and we might deliver more. You might have events such as, I guess if I reflect October 2023, we made a decision to increase our borrowings for the January impounded supply. Although that hasn't come into fruition yet, that was 7 million, 6.1 million, if I remember correctly, that we hadn't factored into these equations. So it's prudent for me to always go at 100%, but reality is if we sit at 80%, we've done a pretty good job with our CapEx program. So I do both calculations because, like I say, it's a passion subject of mine, and I like to know where we sort of are tracking.
But even at 80%,
We're in breach. If we were at 100%, God knows what we'd be doing. Is that right? Oh.
Johns, and I'm just
Thanks, Mayor Tracy. It's now the end of May. It shouldn't be difficult to figure out how much more we're likely to, whether we're going to hit 75% or 65% or whatever, one would imagine.
Worship, I can probably pull it up right now, but our numbers and our spend are at end of April. Obviously, the 20th of May has just been, which means our 30 April payment. So you're only going to get another month worth of costs. When we get to the CapEx report, Mike has provided some estimates as to where he sort of thinks we're going to land come year end, which I'm happy to talk through here. But knowing where we're sort of tracking, we do not plan on taking on any borrowings for our CapEx program between now and year end. Any borrowings that we have done between this report and year end, and I know we have taken on some borrowings, is around our pre-funding because it's financially feasible or viable for us to do so. So that's where our term deposit rates and our borrowing rates come into fruition and just give us that little bit of security.
Gilmore, did you have a question? No.
Okay. as you can tell, it excites me. What excites me in this is that this reassures what we've done in the financial strategy. And for me, the person who has driven the financial strategy, this just makes me happy to know where we are, how we're on track, and what proposed changes I've suggested we make. You can see in the numbers are required.
Councillor Sutherland.
I might be the only one I might have talked about this before. Just when when you get onto page, the quick facts was really good. But just on the chart you produced for this report each time, Sarah, would it be easy to put the actual percentage limits where we are? You know, we have the current limits we have under Food. What a little column that said we are now 143% or 70%.
Good idea.
They're just, and I sometimes have to divide the figures into the figures to try and get that, but would that be helpful maybe?
That's sitting next to current limits, just where we land, Sarah, in actual percentage terms.
Yeah, I do have that information. However, I guess, and I see where you're coming from, I like a percentage as well. I like both. I think the feedback was received that the monetary figure and knowing the dollar figure as to how much room we had available, but also the percentage is a really valid thing and easy for me to chuck in there. You will see within the quick facts, there is a new line item there, debt per rating unit, which we've added in. But please, any suggestions? I make a little bit of a geek in this space and love it.
I saw last week.
They said Auckland was $10,000 ahead, I think it was. It was interesting.
Especially when you look at our rating database size, right?
Yeah.
If there's no other questions on the headroom, I'll jump to the draft Treasury risk management policy if everyone's okay with that. You'll recall we had our Treasury experts, I think it was in June last year, came and presented the proposed draft policy, and it was subject to where we sort of landed within the financial strategy, because the policy enables the strategy, which enables the long-term plan. So making sure that the two talk to each other and we're disabling one from being able to enable the other. So our Treasury risk management policy sets out the guidelines that we have as in a risk adverse sort of scenario is the best way to describe it. It sets out how much borrowing percentages we should have within 1 year renewal, 2 year, going through to, I think it is listed in there to 10 years. And it's just making sure that we have the policy and the structure behind the means to make sure we are taking account of our finances in the most prudent way possible and the risk adverse way possible. I guess just finding that balance. The only changes that I have done to the policy from when it was received in June is the update to the borrowing limits that we have. This policy does not reflect us having to increase or become a credit rated agency. So that process and that policy will come back when the time comes, but just flagging, they're the only changes that I've got going through. Is there any questions? I know we all love a policy.
Councillor Wards.
Thank you, Mayor Tracy. Page 26 on mine, 4.4 security. Those of us who received all those phone calls from those people that yelled at us because their houses were at risk. From time to time and with council approval, security may be offered by providing a charge over one or more of council's assets. Like what?
That is a very good question, and I will actually need to ask our Treasury expert because I don't know the answer. My understanding and the way we operate is that it would be over a rate. Should we default on our debt, would be over our rate. But you're saying separate security over one or more of council assets. So, Raj has got his hands up. He's got an answer. Look at that.
Raj will throw you under the bus here.
Morena, Tracy and councillors. Sarah, you answered it. You're right. They refer to assets generically, and I think for us, it is charged against our rates.
Okay.
And just to answer that question, I guess in the community worried about their assets, council do not own their properties.
It's,
Yeah. So I think that and I think Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think we did as part of the LTP, you did put a blurb out regards to the LGFA, something about the LGFA regards to exposure if let's say we are in breach. That clarifies the point quite clearly that it's a charge against rates, not a charge against ratepayers' properties.
yeah, I just wondered through you, me, Tracy,
Raj, given that there was a separate sentence about council assets, did that mean that some of our forestry or our buildings or whatever would be used as security?
Through your worship, yes, we can. There's an ability if let's say council holds on to, has got investment assets, it could use it as security, but we have never done that.
Okay.
Our charge is always against our ability to rate.
Okay.
Through your worship, forestry assets are actually mentioned specifically because they were an investment of council, still are an investment of council. And should we use that as security, the policy stipulates that the debt must be repaid that is attached to that asset.
Right.
But I'll seek clarification just to make sure what we've said is correct and come back to you, but this will be tabled probably at the June council meeting for adoption before we head into an LTP adoption in July.
Just before you leave the room.
Only other item in this part of the report is the quick facts. Was there any other comments, feedback outside of what councillor Sutherland has very kindly provided?
Sorry. Right, with that, can I just, there's a recommendation on page 13 that we received the management report from the finance manager. Moved, Councillor Ward, seconded Councillor Gilmore. All those in favour, please say aye. Yours wasn't a question, Councillor Wallace. Okay. Thanks, councillors. And sorry, Maxine, I thought you were leaving the room. I just wanted to acknowledge the work that you do within accounting for all of that external funding. It's a huge job, and I guess I got to see a little bit of that when I started looking at those iwi budgets and getting a new appreciation for that. So yeah, as far as being all over those budgets, I certainly acknowledge the work that you're doing there, and you know it inside out. So thank you. It's not an easy job having so much external funding, especially when actually we're just the banker for some of it. That's even tougher. I want to acknowledge that. Thanks, Sarah. I think councillors will break for 15 minutes for morning tea if we can. Ready to do at 1:45.
let's see.
The third quarter performance report. So welcome, Beth.
Your worship and councillors. So I am here to present the third quarter report. It's on page 39 of your printout, I believe. So Sarah and I are going to tag team as we usually do and cover off various sections of the report. Unfortunately, Mike was unable to join us today, so Sarah's going to stand in for him. I'll cover off the explanation of significant OPEX variances. Sarah will jump in from there and go over her service performance variances and then go into the CapEx report. I'll jump back in and discuss briefly the Treasury report, and then between the both of us, we will cover off the self-funded activities. So without further ado, I guess I'll start off with the positives. So if we look at page 41 of the executive summary dashboard, two points I would like to cover off. I did notice last night reviewing the report that there is a little bit of an error in the trend arrows. So where operating revenue suggests that we're tracking negatively, it's an upward trend. And our operating result, likewise, it's showing that we're tracking negatively, but again, it's an improvement on the last quarter. We've taken on board the suggestion from the last finance and performance and committee meeting. So I've separated the dashboard. So you'll now find that the Treasury dashboard section is further down in a more relevant spot under the Treasury report. And so that is on page 64. So I'll talk to that once we get to that section. Our results for the 9 months to 31 March show that we are tracking favourably. So compared to what we had planned to be, our results are 19, our operating result surplus is 19 million, and we had planned at the 9 months to be at 10.5 million. So that's a favourable variance of 8.5 million. If we look at the performance, financial performance, actual versus variance, actual versus budget, slow down Beth, budget variance graph, just below that table, you will see that most of the operating revenue is due to external subsidies that we've received year to date, which Max has covered off in her management report. There's a correlation between our revenue and our expenditure. So the operating expenses, which show that we are tracking ahead of what we plan to be spending, is due to the spend on contractors in the subsidies space. So you spend the money and then get the subsidies for it. Does that make sense? Also, again, I always forget this part. I'm going to take the report as being read. Happy to take questions as we go through. So if we go to page 42, this is our traffic light visual of where each of our activities are tracking. I will draw your attention just to a couple of items. Again, Max has covered most of these off in her external funding report, but these are the drivers for why our variances are either over budget or tracking under budget. So in terms of the community support, you'll see that our net variance at 31 March was showing a favourable variance of 317,000, and this is due to the unbudgeted Mayor's Task Force for Jobs funding. Discussions with the team have indicated that we'll expect to utilise these funds at year end, so we'll be on budget. If we go further down the table, Parks and Reserves is showing a negative variance of 624k. And as Max and Sarah had discussed previously in the management report, this is due to the reallocation of the Better Off funding. So where it had been budgeted to be spent on the Parks and Reserves, it's been now reallocated to the local Water Done Well projects. Forestry is showing an unfavourable variance of 191 $1,000. Sorry, that is part of the commercial investments line. So those are the unbudgeted forestry costs to do with the harvesting and the management fees. When we do the budgets for forestry, we really only budget for rates and insurance. So anything outside of that is unplanned. We'll talk about that further down in the forestry section. If we go to point 13, which is health and safety, but on the detailed explanations on page 50, you notice that the heading is slightly different. So where we've referred to it as health and safety on this main traffic light dashboard, it's actually regulatory services for building and compliance and monitoring. So for future reports, I'll look to make sure that those headings are the same so as to not confuse anyone. We're showing a net unfavourable variance of 160K in here. This is made up because we were able to, in the building department, recruit 2 unbudgeted building officers. That has thrown our staff costs over budget because they were not budgeted for. However, there were savings in the operating expenses where we've had to have less reliance on the solutions building team. So the cost of employing the 2 building officers has given us a favourable result, I would say, in terms of the contracting costs coming down. So less reliance on them to do the BCA work for us. Above that, sorry, there is emergency management. We're showing a favourable variance of 798K there. That's just to do with the Cyclone Gabrielle funding. If I go down further to point 15, we've combined, as usual, the footpaths and roading budgets. So overall, we're showing a net favourable variance of around 7.9 million. Again, that's mostly due to Cyclone Gabrielle funding and then the timing of when our expenses are incurred for those works. But we're expecting those to be on track at year end. What else have I got here? So stormwater drains, we're showing an unfavourable variance of 469,000 at the moment. And that is due to the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund funding that hasn't been received yet. So we're expected to receive that by year end. However, just due to the timing of the receipts, we haven't received those funds yet. And that's to do with the project in Pahiatua around with the iwi. Lastly, water supplies are showing us a favourable variance of 646. I think last quarter I mentioned that of this 300K was to do with the fluoridation project, Dannevirke. And our revenue for metered water is also tracking ahead of what we had planned. However, at 9 months, we were showing as being on track at year end. But factoring in, we're just as quick numbers yesterday just to factor in where our expenses are at the moment, and we may be slightly over by 200K at the 12-month report. Some of those drivers are to do with the Pahiatua treatment plant, which had unplanned reactive maintenance done to it. We had light bulbs being, was it light? I don't know the correct terminology, but light bulbs? UV bulbs. Oh, UV lights. UV bulbs, that's the one. Have some unplanned work that was carried out on that plant there, and there are also chemical costs that we are expecting to fully utilise the unspent budgets to year end. There is, and before I finish off in this area of the OPEX dashboard, I also want to bring attention to the wastewater. We're showing a surplus of 177K. So And that is just due to the timing of when contract maintenance work is carried out. We had initially planned for sludge disposal to take place. However, we missed out on the season and we're looking to come up with a strategy for the new financial year. It has been reflected in year one of the LTP though.
Tackle this entrance again.
If you have a question on this part, let me know now.
Or are we on?
Number 6, detailed explanation of significant operating variances.
Do you want me to carry on with?
That's what we've just covered, isn't it?
Sorry, what I've done is given you, oh, sorry. For you, Tracy. I guess I've tackled it in 2 parts. I've given you the high level view and then gone into detail as to what the activities are that make up the operational variances. From a high level perspective, we are tracking ahead. And on page 43.5, most of those drivers are due to the external funding. I've actually tried to, I understand that not everybody is financially wired, and I've just been trying to make it a bit more understandable for readers, just create a bit more engagement, a bit more discussion around the table. Like I said, external funding is one of the drivers for our great result for this 9-month report. And off that, we've got maintenance costs, which are lower, but that's just due to the timing when works are carried out on all of our assets. You'll see that also staff costs are ahead of budget, but that is due to the leave accruals adjustment that is done. So that makes up 619K of our total operating costs. But other than that, our other operating expenses are tracking below budget at the 9-month report.
Councillor Wards and Councillor Gilmore.
I have questions on most of the detailed analysis. So do you want to do one by one, or do you want me to get me out of the way? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Thanks, Councillor Gilmore, and we'll work through them.
Thanks very much, Mayor Tracy. Similarly to Sharon, I'll have some detailed questions as we get on to part 6, but I just wanted to start, if that's okay, on page 43 for 5.4.1 was talking about the increase in insurance premium. So it's more just a quick question around that. Council has expressed a desire to review what our risk levels are and risk appetite and what our insurance levels are. Do we have an update on when we're likely to have that conversation as a council?
My understanding is there's an audit and risk workshop coming up that's been diaried, and that's included in that day. So haven't off the top of my head got the date, but it's in the next couple of weeks. Yeah. So Johns.
Mayor Tracy, if I could just speak to that too. I know Aon's booked in to come, possibly associated with that audit and risk meeting, but is it possible to get somebody from some other council or organisation that has been through the process of assessing their risk and assuming and carrying their own risk to see what experience they've had, and as well as hearing from the insurance brokers who are obviously biased when.
So Philip Jones is facilitating this session, so he will have some experience from other councils, but Brian can also include MWLS.
Yeah, through me, Tracy. So MWLS is having similar conversations because obviously our insurance goes through the MWLS. So other councils are asking similar questions. One of the suggestions was also looking around what can be self-insured. So some options and what needed, and then obviously that level of risk, and then what don't we even bother insuring. MWS Council's also shared that Aon, obviously have a commercial interest in some of this. So a lot of those discussions should be held without Aon being part of those. And I guess sort of alluding to that, Councillor Johns. Certainly there is some work being done around this through the LAS as well. And I think there was a council that did quite an in-depth study around self-insurance, but there were some risks associated with EQC, et cetera, wherever not, because they'll only come to the party if you're insured. So does that count as insurance? So there has been some work being done. I can reach out to MWSCs and see where we're at regarding that also.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to add to that, the workshop is scheduled for the 23rd of July. But further to that, we had an MWLAS meeting, I think it was last week, and the LAS, the collective, were all in the same boat with their insurance premiums. Aon were on the call for part of that. Obviously, as alluded to, they've got a commercial side that they're sort of looking at, but the LAS group in its entirety, the feeling was exactly what Brian has said. So we're in the process of sort of working towards how, what, where, why, and what that would look like for us as a local government body.
Thanks very much. I think one of the councils, just as a side note, Auckland looked at self-insuring vehicle fleets, and I think there's been a few that have been doing it for a while. Just my last question before we jump over to section 6 was Beth, through you, Mayor Tracy. Beth, you were talking about the staff costs and the unbudgeted leave accruals part. Just so I can get a little bit of a better understanding of why that's unbudgeted, because the leave accruals, we would be aware of what they're likely to be, how they'd be trending at this point of time, in opposed to other financial years. But I'm not sure if I'm missing something there of why that would be unbudgeted, or is there any way we can capture that in future budgets?
Through Your Worship, I'll take this one. Our leave accruals are budgeted at an organisational level, I guess, as a liability. There is a liability recognised within the books. However, it's the way I would describe the way we budget for it is it's a book transaction. It doesn't. It's not a true reflection. It's just an estimate. I think we changed pay providers. Cameron was still here, so at least 3 years ago. And as part of that change, it allows us to post the accrual each pay period, each fortnight. So that's where you're seeing the actual leave accrual for each activity a staff member is allocated to cropping up. With regards to how we could budget for it at that level, I guess I would need to come back to you as to what the mechanics of it would, because the budget system is different to the reporting system, which is different to the payroll system. So it's just take on board your comment, and can I come back to you?
Interesting. And thanks very much, Sarah. I knew it wouldn't be as simple as just we just add it in there. I suppose for me, whenever we see something large that's unbudgeted, it can raise a red flag. We know red flag should be appearing because it is planned. We know that it's going to happen. So I guess it'll save you getting questions on it if it's already put in. So I'd be grateful if we could at least consider how that might reflect on our financials.
Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Tracy. Just going back to 16 solid waste. I'm passionate about this. I see we've really got a 898.58 tonne reduction in the work that's been implemented, and that's not to the year's date end, right? The question I ask, when the tonnage is one thing, but do you get the round trip fee? Because every time a tonne goes on a truck, it might be another truck, or I don't know how many trucks. That must have been astronomical cost. So can we get Are we allowed to get more breakdown on that?
Through your worship, I think in our last finance and performance, we tried to tackle a deep dive into the solid waste activity. But because we've brought some of the services in-house, the numbers didn't truly reflect where we sort of were landed and what was sort of happening. What I can say is our tonnage is down, but our revenue is up.
Yeah, it's,
We do pay for the truck, obviously, to take the waste to the Central Hawke's Bay landfill. And Beth would probably be better placed than I am to answer this, but I would assume with the decrease in tonnage, your trucks aren't going as often and there would be a decrease in cost. But happy to potentially flag for another agenda now that we're more than a couple of months in as to what that activity is doing for another finance and performance.
that is so positive to see 900 tonne off our operational cost. Because you've got to ask the question, no, there's not a lot more people in Dannyville. And you look at the curbside collection, those figures weren't varied much. You know, so whoever I thank them well.
Thanks. Okay, Sarah, I guess that takes us into. Sorry, Beth.
Me, Tracy. So, sorry for jumping ahead before. So back in 2.6, which is the detailed operating variances. I guess the activities that I wanted to cover off I've done previously under 0.5. I have to own up to something. I've dropped the ball for this quarter, and I realised from the last presentation there was a request made to drill down detail into our OPEX performance with the exclusion of Cyclone Gabrielle impacts. So I have take ownership of that and apologise. So I'll look to include that in the 12-month report to separate the Cyclone Gabrielle income and expenditure. So so then we can get a true reflection of the impact on our BAU. Happy to take questions page by page.
Page 44. Anything there?
I can try.
And I've just circled the transport choices because my understanding was that was 2 million and that's showing me at 1.4. So I just had was there any reason for that variance? Scott, you might be able to, we kept it just in case some of it. A small amount, so 600,000. And was that, okay. I'll have a talk to the Alliance around that one.
I would just probably highlight that within that, for the full year, there is a $2 million budget of subsidy to come in for transport choices. But my understanding, and I could be wrong, I think from what the discussion has just been, that this has been completely removed. So that activity will show 2 million revenue not being received by year end.
Thanks, Mayor Tracy. I'll need to check back on my notes. I think there was a really small amount that was left over that we were able to keep within that program that will be used for a very small section of footpath. That was my understanding because work had progressed to a certain point, but I'll need to dig out my info. Got it.
You could just confirm that with us, that would be great. Okay, thanks. Right, page 45, council awards.
Thank you, Mayor Tracy. I have a question on item number 1, community support. So we've received 325,000 for MTFJ, of which 121 has been spent. Now, there's a reference there that you expect this activity to be on budget at year end, but you've only got 3 months.
Probably answer that. Oh, sorry, the coordinator has got quite a detailed budget, and with this, you're always waiting to have those jobs confirmed and the funding going out. So I've seen the very detailed budget of how that's planned. And I guess for me, when we've got that funding there, it's if something doesn't take over, it's like come back to us so we can see what we can do. So that is highly detailed budget from the coordinator on how he's going to achieve that. Happy to share that if you want to see it.
Not much time, but obviously. So still on page 45 in representation, Mayor Tracy, through you. Kind of had the answer around when we talked about the iwi and the better off funding for building capacity, but the last sentence in that paragraph concerns me. Council's not expecting to receive the full funding at year end. I know we talked earlier about A, we're going to have a dig down, but B, I always get worried when we're not going to receive.
Through you, Worship, I'll tackle that one. So I think we chatted a little bit about it in the better off part of the external funding. We can only claim retrospectively of the costs that we've incurred. So within this activity, I think there's 250 budgeted revenue for the iwi allocation. We can only claim up to the costs we as a council have incurred for that period. So we're not likely to, I think if you look at it, the cost.
We'll spend 180, we've billed them for 80.
Then I would say that that's potentially just an error that I've written in that part of the report, because I've signalled to the team to make sure that we are recouping all costs incurred by 30 June. 30 June is a critical time for my audit friends, as we all know, so making sure that we've got that all in place. So my apologies if I've I obviously have made an error in what I've said there. I expect that their total costs incurred will be completely recovered by external funding. Apologies for the.
Still in representation, but on the next page, do you want me to carry on? I've circled the this is the last fourth bullet point down at the still under representation. Remainder of the cost savings around this activity is made of subscriptions at 32,000. I flicked over the audit plan consultant fees. I knew I couldn't debate that one, but what's covered off in subscriptions with representation?
That is our LGNZ subscription.
Councillor Gilmore.
I think Tracy, and still in representation on 46 as well. There was just the bullet point around councillor remuneration being 39K under, which is often quite topical in the community. Out of curiosity, why would we have not known exactly how much councillor remuneration would be? Because as it's sort of pointed out in there, it is set by the Remuneration Authority in advance.
Through you, Worship, the annual plan was not part of my budget setting. Yes, where I'm going to go. But what it is the budget is based off, we have estimated that there could be an increase for remuneration from the Remuneration Authority come through. I personally don't know the process, and LED would be the best person to probably come back to me on this around how often it is renewed. Is it a 3-year annually? So there is always a time lag between when we're doing our budgets as to when the budgets are finally set and put into place. So just highlighting, I think I would have to do work around the percentage we budgeted for that to increase by, but clearly it is coming back that it wasn't as much as we thought.
That's another 4,000 each, and you're going to get rid of that.
Well, that's what it means.
Well, it just means at the beginning of spend.
However, the Remuneration Authority hasn't said that. Councillor Gilmore.
Thanks, Mayor Tracy. And just the second to last paragraph down there, there was the line about operational grants to local committees tracking 25 grand ahead. So I understand where we've had changes with community committees and the times with that. Just curious why that sort of hadn't been accounted for, because that money was always intended to go to a community committee. So I'm just surprised that that hasn't been accounted for in the budget. If we knew we hadn't spent it then, we know we're going to spend it there, should have been added to it.
Through your worship, I guess this is one of those wonderful gifts that sort of book entry that hasn't occurred. I guess for us to be able to accrue that cost at year end and to satisfy our accounting and our audit requirements, we would have needed an invoice to be able to do that, to factor that in. So we didn't have that in place at 30 June, so we can't technically spend the funds even though they are sort of earmarked. So generally how we've sort of gone about it, I think you'll find within the community boards, there's always there's a time lag between where a grant is advise the recipient that they can receive it. However, they can't claim it back until we have an invoice to be able to pay on. So we just sort of let the overs and unders come out in the wash. 25,000 in the scheme of our budget isn't large, but signalling it here because it does look like an overspend, but in hindsight and retrospectively, it isn't. Does that, I don't know if I've answered that very well, but.
Yeah,
We can, but we need to have an invoice to be able to do that, to meet our audit requirements.
Sorry. Thanks. And this is more just to help my understanding of how these things go. So I'm not saying that it's not done the right way. I suppose if we know we hadn't spent it, we weren't going to spend it in the previous financial year. This is really looking at how we're tracking against budget. So it's not necessarily what's been paid out. Absolutely, it would show as an underspend in the last year. But could we not add it to our budget by saying we know this year we're going to be spending 25 grand more? And I know it's not a huge amount, but the budget is really dictating what we're planning to spend. Or have I just way oversimplified it?
Oh, it's a very great question. Our auditors come in and check our budget to our council resolution. So the council resolution would be the annual plan budget. So we can't edit that without a council specific council resolution. So if we had have done that, then sure, we probably could have. Yeah.
Thank
But a lot of extra admin for not any real gain, if I'm honest. In the nicest way, sorry.
Anything on page 47?
We're getting tired of hearing my voice on housing. I love a good argument around a self-funding activity, which means we're going to end up over budget at the year end. Total operating expenses 97,000 was higher than budget year to date. Now I'm figuring from memory that we didn't have a full year of rental because they weren't in it. Is that going to be part of the explanation, or how is it that we can have a self-funding activity that's still costing our ratepayers money?
Me, Tracy. So I've had a discussion with the team, and in terms of the flats, maintenance work is done as and when it can be done, if that makes sense. Revenue wise, our tenants say we were at 97% occupancy rate. So but some of the works that could have been that were undertaken was able to be done with the flats being tenanted. And my understanding was that the drainage for the Afton Court was undertaken. So I guess they were unplanned expenditure, but they took the opportunity at the time to complete those works.
Sorry, through your worship, could I just add on to that? I just really want to stress that there is no burden on our ratepayers for this activity. Although we're indicating that the housing reserve is going to be overdrawn at year end, we will be borrowing, we will be charging interest. This will be completely like its own little books, I guess, is what is, if I'm going to go accountant language, we keep our own little books separate for the housing and the forestry activity. So there is no burden, just really wanting to stress, there is no burden on our ratepayers for this activity.
Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Tracy. This is just an observation. I would think going forward, we would probably, it's probably the wrong forum to mention it in, but logic should prevail here. Things get old. We're in a perfect storm with some of these flats because of age, and it is actually mentioned in the report here. Going forward, and I don't know what happens to all the money that goes from rent, but one should use the old adage, you know, put a few walnuts away, so when all these water cylinders go in another 20 years' time, you've got some. And so, or does it just go into a general fund? So that's what I'm saying. So the question is, probably the reserve's not big enough. That's the observation I'll make.
And we also built Afton Court, which came out of that reserve. So just for councillors' reference, I did talk to Sarah and Raj about at the next Finance and Performance Committee meeting, just having a little bit more look into the building of Afton Court and the decisions there. Councillor Gilmore.
Thanks very much, Mayor Tracy, and through you to Sarah. I wasn't surprised when I saw this, considering the conversations that we've had over setting rentals for our ratepayers. Having a look at this, obviously this is giving us information a little bit further down the track from when we made that decision. So I'm really just double checking that there's a level of confidence around the fees, the rental that we set quite recently, that will be enough to start moving that reserve fund back up, that we're comfortable at this point with the rental. Not that we can change it now, but just want to get a bit of comfort.
Your worship, I'm going to probably be the bearer of bad news, I guess. I think things are going to get worse before we get better. I think we have taken the right steps to get better, but just with the vacancy of flats and sort of things and how the timing of these things are occurring, I think some tough decisions would potentially come in the next 12 months for you. I think we have done enough for the next financial year, but I think you're looking short term, and it needs to be a long-term portfolio discussion.
Thanks very much, and I appreciate your candor through you, Mayor Tracy, because this was some of the conversation we had at the time when we were setting that rate, and at that point we did have a level of confidence that it would be tight. I recall it being said, but it would be putting us on the right trajectory. I don't like to, in these meetings, through you, Mayor Tracy, to Brian, to be requesting extra reports, but I think that we are going to need to have some more information on that to make sure that this is truly going to remain self-funded.
I just probably, with the work that we have done, I just didn't want to give the false sense of hope that within the next 6 months, that increase in rent is going to fix it. Over the long-term plan that we've done the rental increase for and the work that the team has done around it, yes, we're heading in the right direction, but please do not anticipate come 31 December, we're going to be in a better position, because it is a plan, but is it a long-term plan? Sorry if I've caused undue stress.
Johns.
Mayor Tracy, I see you make mention of the higher than budgeted insurance costs as one of the factors, but I suggest that might be a lot of it. you know, you get 30% increase in insurance or more, that would easily cut out $35,000 to $47,000.
A lot of work in understanding the maintenance and the state and everything that needs to be done, but also our obligations and inspections and that of the landlord as well. So I think we had discussed that for around a bit of a deep dive, so I think that's a good idea. Anything further on that page, page 48? No. Councillor Gilmore.
Thanks very much, Mayor Tracy. Just at the bottom of page 49, talks about the pause with the Te Awa Community Foundation. Just wondering what again, this might not be the right forum for that, but is that budgeted in for the long-term plan, or is it currently under pause? I know we're still looking at that community area, but.
So through Mayor Tracy. So we do currently have a contract with Te Ao Foundation. So I think what we decided through the LTP is leave that because we've got to work through the implications of contract, and that will come back in year one to relook at the benefits, I guess, of that contract and ongoing commitment, and whether or not, what are our options at that point.
A quick one on 148. There's 3 activities there, but I doubt, are they all creating that problem?
Which,
Number 9, name.
international investments?
Yeah, 48%. Page
48.
Yeah. So equally,
Those commercial investments. I just want a bit of dreams.
I think forestry was down at 191,000.
yeah, that's
Negative variance. And that ties in with it. So it must be all forestry, is it?
You, Mayor Tracy. So yes, the 191 is made up of a net variance across all 3 activities. So we've got the forestry activity, the aerodrome, and the third. It slipped my mind, but majority of that unfavourable variance is due to the unbudgeted forestry harvesting and management costs. So that's what the and for future reporting, itemise the ups and downs for each of those 3 activities separately.
Thank you.
Councillor Johns.
Isn't that unbudgeted harvesting? Harvesting normally has a positive. Not a negative, but is that, you sure that's not pruning and thinning?
Sorry, if you go to page 66, and I don't mean to make you jump between pages, we have said that it's the pruning of the Birch North Forest block of 227,000 and the management fees of $8,000.
Further on page 49, page 50.
Your Worship, I'm going to just take the time to highlight a couple of things, and unfortunately, the things I'm going to highlight are all sort of negative. I just don't want it to be a surprise come when we get the 12-month report, things are a shock that they're not achieved. So where I can signal they're not achieved, I'm doing that now because I don't anticipate it changing. So within 7.1, I guess there's a little bit of a blurb down the bottom. It says councils meet 67% of our SPMs. This is up from 62 from the same period last year, but it is a decrease from the 6-month mark. So just highlighting that, I guess. And then what I haven't got in here and will come in the 12-month report is we have just received our community survey results. They weren't received in time for this report, but something to look forward to in the 12-month. I'm sorry, I have not personally dug deep into them yet, but that will come. So we are showing 4 measures as not met. 2 of these are not going to come as a surprise to you. They are in the mandatory space and they are around our wastewater where we have received infringement and abatement notices. One of them I think I've signalled from the start, and we signalled from the start of last year as well, is that within the long-term plan we set a measure in the community development activity around a survey to measure our leadership with our community organisations, of which we've never completed. So that measure is showing as not achieved, as with other years, and is something we've rectified within this upcoming long-term plan. The other one, which we jumped to when we were talking about PARS, is in the park space. Fontaine has signalled that the team have done work around the health and safety audits for our parks, and that this will not be rectified before year end. So we're signalling that this measure is going to be not achieved. However, any immediate health and safety concerns or risks are being addressed, and the rest of the work has been prioritised. I think we discussed briefly some of the stuff in that space is around the matting needs to be redone and things like that. So understand that that will come, or we will look to make sure it comes within the long-term plan. There's also 6 measures in the needs improvement category. 5 of these relate to the water activity, with 1 in the roading activity. Roading comes as no surprise. So just, I haven't gone into that one too much, but within the water, 2 of these measures are around our compliance with Part 4 and Part 5. I think you've listened to me go on about this within our annual reports, and with the change in drinking water standards, and Part 4, Part 5 no longer exist, and all of those wonderful things. We took the approach that in the last annual report and the one before, if I remember correctly, we are required for our auditors to get an external report on our performance around this. So I don't think we should be changing our measures until we get the external report to back that up. So signalling any concerns that the team have, we will be doing throughout the year. But until we get the report that states our compliance around Part 4, Part 5, or the protozoa, and I can't remember what the other one is called, we won't be changing this measure from needs improvement from last year. I think from last year, the issues were around data capture and the timing in which it sort of took place. I think you'll recall we had to have continuous data for quite a long period of time. And then obviously if there's a power outage, that resets it, and we sort of get a not achieved as a result of those things. Is there any questions around the service performance measure?
Councillor Johns.
Thanks, Mayor Tracy. With regard to 7.2.6, that weren't compliant from 4 out of its 7 water treatment plants due to water sampling frequency. Is it simply that instead of doing it once a week, it's once a fortnight, or?
Worship, it might just be that we've missed a day, one day, and that inadvertently means we've missed the whole year. I can't tell you not to do that. I can only draw your attention to the independent report that I received.
Question would be what it would take to be compliant and how we look at that. Okay.
Okay. If there's no other questions in the service performance space, I'll put on my mic hat and jump into the capital expenditure report. He's given quite a detailed analysis of where we're tracking. He has said as at April, I want to confirm this is at 31 March. The council had spent 22 million of a $47 million program. I have, after our discussion this before tea break, I've looked up at April, this is increased to a spend of 26 million. He's given quite a bit of a detail. There was 204 projects, of which, actually, sorry, I'll back up. He's told us how the budget has come to be, which we should all, and we're all well aware of. There's 204 projects that we are tracking in this space. 44 he has put in a bucket called as required. That had a total budget of 15.6, of which 9.4 has been spent at 31 March. He's given us a detail as to what these budget lines entail. Then he's talking about our individual projects, so 160 make up the rest of them. He's given quite a detail as to around how many in each phase, sorry, which is really good. He's also, we didn't include it, but he has given me in his piece of work that he sent through where we were tracking last year. So in the same period last year, we had 40% in planning. This year, we've got 33. We had 43% in delivery. This time this year, there's 46. And then within the closure and the close, there was about 5%. As you can see, although it's still a low number, it's a massive improvement at 16% from the prior year. He's also given detail as to what's in each stage. I think I said that already. And he's come to the end, and of the 26 million that was still to be spent, approximately 10 is budgeted against the Dannevirke impounded supply, the Eketahuna and the Paeatua wastewater programs. Transport choices is $2 million, which we understand is not going to go ahead. Route 52, he's signalling, and we all know this is a multi-year project that we will be looking to carry over 2 million from this financial year to the next for that project to be completed. I understand that extension of time has been approved and signed off. And then approximately 6 million is remaining in the as required stage. He has also put in a blurb there where him and his team are continually seeking feedback from external sources, from internal sources, and they have received some feedback around their project management framework and some organisations stipulating with external funding that they would, as long as our framework is followed, they're pretty happy. So really good piece of positive news thrown into his report. Is there any questions?
Awards.
Just a quick request, that comparison of percentages, could that be flicked out? Because that's really useful to see the value in the comment you've just made, Sarah, which I know is reflected further down about the respect that having such a framework holds, to be able to demonstrate we're actually getting on with it. We're not just planning. And so I'd appreciate just those percentages if that was possible. Thanks.
Yes, same period to same period.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
No worries.
Worries because it's not.
In comparison, so that's a report that shows just how much we've got on and is very transparent. So certainly acknowledge Mike for that. Councillor Sutherland.
Thanks, Tracy. Just a apologies. I had a note and it went straight past Councillor Steve, jog my memory, but no, I agree with that. Terrific report from Mike. Really, really valuable. Thanks. Just a comment. Steve mentioned that the tonnage for the waste, the treatment rubbish dump. There was a big reduction in tonnage. And I just had a question. I've made a note myself. It is a lot. I just wondered, was that a drop off in usage by any of our operators? So don't need to answer that now, but I mean, I just wonder whether some of our commercial operators were dodging our plant. Well, not dodging, had other methods of disposing of the rubbish, and that was quite a big drop, it was 900 tonnes, but just wondered about that. That's all. So,
I'll go to councillor Gilmore. I did have some feedback around cost, but I wasn't aware anybody had been doing it. Councillor Gilmore.
Thanks, Mayor Tracy. I recall us having this is quite a wide discussion when we were doing our annual plan and we were setting our fees, and it was highlighted that there was a real risk for commercial operators to choose to drive to other council areas to dispose of their waste. And I think even the fees that we set, we knew at that point with the decision we made that there was still a risk of losing some of those. So that potentially has become apparent. But I'm with Kerry. I'd be really keen to know, is that a significant drop off from commercial operators rather than day to day? Because then we can plan effectively.
Through your worship, I would like to confirm with Joe, but my understanding is that we have potentially lost one of our commercial operators. However, she has gained another, and that the tonnage is not a result of the commercial operations.
Okay. I have a little bit of a look at that just to confirm. Councillor Johns.
Thanks, Mayor Tracy. It could reflect the economy, lack of building activity and general activity. I remember some time ago hearing some stats put out nationally, and the amount of rubbish going into dumps was measured as a means of looking at commercial activity, well, or the health of the nation, basically, in terms of whether we're going downhill or probably have something to do with that.
Councillor Wallace.
I think we're missing a point here. The reason the tonnage went down is quite simple. It's been processed better. It's contaminated tonnage that went away. So I was trying to give our in-house decision a compliment. It's the way it's processed, and instead of throwing it on the truck and sending it away, I'm only surmising that, but yeah, look at the process, look at the history. There's the answer.
Yeah, through me, Tracy. Yeah, I think they're actually quite right, Councillor Steve. I think there's some process around when you leave them on trucks for days and days, the weight's obviously a lot more because you're carrying water, and there's a range of other process improvements that Joe and the team has put in place to reduce that. So I think she did present on this at some point not too long ago around some of those initiatives that will certainly contribute towards this. Yeah, jog my memory.
Thank you.
Back to my voice, moving on. So Treasury section. What we have done in this area, we found that we were repeating quite a bit of information that was already covered off in the management report. So we've just tried to make the report easier to read and not overflowing with information. If there is anything that we have excluded from here that you'd like to be covered off in future reports, please let me know and I'll bring it back in. So on page 64, if we look at the Treasury performance dashboard, you can see here that overall we are tracking, in terms of the finance costs, we're tracking ahead of where we'd planned to be. That's just a result of higher interest rates. That's offset though by our term deposit rates also being higher. So for the 9 months to 31 March, we received about 1.1 million in interest revenue, and that's offset by the 830,000 interest expense cost. just a reflection of where rates are trending at the moment. External debt, we are also slightly tracking under where we were planning on being. But if we wrap that up and bring it back to our CapEx, our capital delivery of our capital program, we're between 45-50% deliverable on that. I've done a quick calc of where we're expected to land at year end. We've already, for the fourth quarter, we have borrowed an additional $12 million. So we are going to be $7 million ahead of budget, and that's not including any delivery of capital projects.
But it is offset by term deposit.
Is offset by term deposit to a degree. So of that $12 million, I've taken some notes, written down some notes. We have pre-funded 6 million of that. So that will be pre-funded. We normally look to pre-fund term deposits for 6 months to get any benefit from taking out the pre-funding. Our Treasury advisor has suggested we go out to market and try and obtain an indicative interest rate of 6.3. We managed to get 6.31. The remainder, $6 million of debt for the fourth quarter, which I'll talk to in the 12 months report, is just to refinance our upcoming debt maturities in July and October of this year. But we will also look to put those into term deposit as well, but the return on that won't be as great as the pre-funded debt. Our cash position, we're tracking about $1 million ahead of where we'd planned to be. Again, that's just due to timing of when we receive external funding, and we can only estimate what our payment runs are going to be. So we're pretty much on track in that respect. Also, if I go back to the finance costs, what we originally planned for when we did the budget setting process was an interest rate of 3.93%, and that the actuals to 31 March is 5.84, so there is an increase. We go on to page 65. I talk about our treasury strategy. So that hasn't changed from previous reports. We're continually meeting with PwC, our external advisors, on a monthly basis, and during those sessions we look at what we can pre-fund in terms of debt that's coming up for maturity. We look at our interest compliance. We look at all factors. Our debt headrooms are discussed there. So Raj and Brett offer valuable input into those discussions, and they help us prepare strategies moving forward. So happy with the work that they've done in that space, and I think with our hedging strategies that we've put in place, it shows. Current external debt position, I discussed this when I talked to the table on page 64. So this is just showing us where our debt is at 31 March. So total debt at the moment is 61.2 million. Of that, 4 million is pre-funded. So that was to the 9 months to 31 March. So it's some amount that's carried forward. The pre-funded debt will convert to core debt once whatever debt we have pre-funded for matures. So I think from memory, we had April debt maturing of $4 million. So in the 12-month report, that $4 million will convert to core debt. So you'll see that coming out of the pre-funding line. However, you'll have a new pre-funding line with the $5 million that we've pre-funded. Is that a bit of a... Have I explained that very well? I feel like, yep, okay. Right, because I'm sometimes not very good at getting my words out properly. What you'll notice missing from this treasury section is we used to just do a cookie cutter of PwC's economic update. However, we've decided for this report, we've attached it as an appendix. So that way you can read it at your own leisure and it doesn't get muddled in with what we have chosen to talk about in the treasury section. Debt financing cost again, that's just due to higher interest rates. And then that will be expected to increase with the additional $12 million that we've taken out in the fourth quarter. And cash flow management and liquidity is just what cash we have in the bank and our investments that we can call on when we need to. So yeah, that's pretty much just tracking on budget. Do we have any questions in the treasury space? If I can't answer them, I'm sure Sarah will be able to answer them as well, and Raj.
Thank you, Mayor Tracy. 9.2, the external debt position, that little graph there. And thanks for explaining it the way you have, Beth. So if I back up the bus, at the start of the year, we had a total debt of 52 million. 3 months later, we've increased that debt by another 10 million. And you're indicating in our last quarter, we're possibly going to borrow another 12. Is this why we're going to be in breach, Sarah? No, it's not because of that. We just keep adding all of this debt. When are we going to get with the program and address the debt rather than keep borrowing? Just,
You know.
Sorry, cut you off.
No, you're not welcome.
I guess this is where the decision around the rate for the debt repayment becomes a critical piece. This is where the strategy that we're putting in place around our extra depreciation funding within the long-term plan becomes a critical piece. Raj has just messaged me and he has said we need to borrow because we need to do the capital program. He's here. He's some of the borrowing that we have done was based on an indication around the impounded supply and where we were going to track and where that was going to land. Some of it is around timing, around when we submit likes of our Waka Kotahi monthly claim and when the funding is actually received back from it. So there's so many factors that go into it, but I guess your core debt, your debt is where your strategies are critical for us moving forward. I can't stress enough moving forward the amount of attention, the amount of, I can't quite articulate what I want to say, but the importance this becomes moving forward for us.
Can I just propose, because if Raj was here, he'd be glaring at me by now, but you know. So within our strategy, and I get, you know, there's a whole lot of levers that are within that strategy that will keep us safe. However, to go from 10 million in 3 months and then expect that again in the next 3 months, keeping it simple for me, we've suggested one of the strategies is the 2%. So we're increasing our debt by more than 2% every quarter. So when I guess I'm wondering, when is Peter going to sort it out with Paul, or you know, where's the piper going to cool the? Sorry, Jess, but we can't just keep doing this. Come on, Raj. Look me in the eyeballs.
To you, Mayor Tracy, if I can jump in, Sarah, if you don't mind. These are good questions you're asking, and I understand the concerns that you have about our debt limit and breaching, and I think we talked about that in the LTP, and that's why Sarah initially talked about the financial strategy for the coming long-term plan. The elements that are in the financial strategy would mean that we will be able to manage our capital investments, our debt-funded capital investments in the LTP, given the strategies in the financial strategy for the LTP. So the question I guess you're asking is, why are we borrowing? I guess we're borrowing because that's the program that we have. That's the program that we have in the annual plan that we intend to do. what Sarah has done, and Sarah, you can jump in, see whether I haven't got it right, is that when she did the forecasts for the current year, and also when she looked to develop the financial strategy for the LTP, we have factored in the borrowing that's required for the AP, any carry forward projects, and the borrowing that's required for the LTP. And if we follow the strategy in the LTP, we would be within our debt limit and there wouldn't be a risk of breaching. Where the risk happens is when we then incur expenditure or borrow that is unbudgeted. And I think that's where, Sarah talked about the discipline is needed for us when we look at unbudgeted expense coming forward, that we think about what that impact is going to be on our debt limit and what are we choosing not to do. Yeah. So in the pre-funding that the team is doing, it's all driven from the capital program forecast that we have for the year. So that's all within the funding envelope that we plan for. Where we run into a risk, potentially could run into a risk if we are looking to bring in projects that are unbudgeted, or for example, we bring back a project that we say that maybe it's 2 million, but councillors, it doubled into 4. Then we need to consider, I guess, those elements. So your concerns are real and valid, but I guess if we deliver on the program and we deliver as per what's in the LTP and we follow the financial strategy in the LTP, I think we will fit within our funding envelope. If I got that right, Sarah?
Yes.
However, Mayor Tracy, if I could add, I guess what Sarah is worried about, keeps her awake at night most of the time, it's the headroom. Is that, yes, we're within, but we don't have, I would say, want of a better word, a large or a healthy headroom. We're quite close. And that's why I guess, Sarah is working closely with the PMO and the Tree Waters team to make sure that our forecast it's correct. There's some rigor around a capital program, a capital forecasting. Thank you, Mayor Tracy.
Well, that's a conversation that we're going to have every single time. And I think even in the next deep dive, it's actually to start, I've got a note just to start talking about what credit rated looks like, what that process is, and start, having those conversations as well. But the more that we talk about this and understand it before those decisions are made.
I just guess you've touched on it just now. In our Treasury meeting we had this month, I've signalled around the credit rating and getting that process underway, and how important it is that we take our community and our elected members on this journey with us as to why, what, where and how. So thank you for raising that and just telling you, my good friends at PwC, Raj and Brett, they will be taking us all on this journey. If there's no other questions in the Treasury space, I guess I'll quickly move into the forestry section for the self-funded activity. Oh, sorry, my apologies.
Raj, what's the name of that brown alpaca?
Not a council AC, salad.
True, Mayor Tracy, that's my neighbor's, not mine. It's just a wish that I thought maybe I'll follow my neighbor and get a menagerie of animals, and that could include an alpaca.
Worship, the self-funding activity forestry, I think we've covered off previously where it's sort of tracking. We have included the reserve balance of 588,000 as at 31 March. Normally within our reports for the Finance and Performance Committee, we give you a separate forestry report. As you can see within number 10.2 of your report, there wasn't too much of an update to provide, so we've included it under this section. So I apologise to Councillor Johns if you're expecting something separate. I've included it here. Is there any questions?
Councillor Sutherland?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Mayor Tracy. I was just going to ask a question on the forestry. I think we had placed, did we put the forest on the market currently?
Yeah.
Any interest? Just, you might not know that, but maybe some stage, perhaps at Mayor Tracy's meeting.
Any interest, Brad?
If I can, through you, Mayor Tracy, you'd see a report at the end of the month council meeting. We have concluded the tender, and I'm in the midst of pulling a report together. So all will be revealed at the end of the month in a full council confidential report.
No thanks.
Thanks, mate.
Councillor Gilman?
Thanks very much, Mayor Tracy. Still just on forestry, looking at 10.2.2. Good to see that all of the outstanding issues with the abatement notice have been covered, but just wondering, is there still any financial liabilities remaining with that block? With some of those issues that have come up?
Through you, Mayor Tracy. So there's two elements there in terms of one is the work that was required to resolve the issues regarding to abatement. No financial liabilities from council because that's all been done by the contractor. The second was the dispute that we have with the neighboring property. That's still ongoing. We don't expect a liability on council part because we will also look to recover that amount from the contractor. We've been having some really good discussions, ongoing discussions with the contractor and the neighbor.
Good to hear.
Thanks, Raj.
Okay, so I'll jump in, since Kasia's covered off, discuss most of the operating performance for the pensioner housing, and where it was at. So we had budgeted for an operating surplus for the period of $46,000. And we had an operating loss of 38. So in effect, that was due to the unplanned maintenance taken out on the units, as well as increase in the rates and insurance expenditure. In terms of the capital expenditure on the pensioner housing units, we are tracking ahead of what we had planned. So 438 versus a planned budget of $389,000. However, I have been informed by the team that the capital expenditure program for the year on the units has been completed and no further works will be undertaken between now and the end of June. Pensioner housing reserve, I believe I do know that at the last quarter we reported that the reserve was we signalled that the reserve would be overdrawn at year end. So that is still tracking as what we had signalled, and we're expecting it to continue on that basis. At 31 March, it was overdrawn by $420,000. Have we got any question? Oh,
Sorry, I just wanted to give a little bit of confidence, I guess, to the elected members in this space. Our team is working very closely with the facilities department within the pensioner housing activity, and unless something is urgent and required, we've asked the team to hold fire into the new financial year.
Performance report that anyone wanted to highlight?
Just,
pick on us, as it were. So I like reading, you know, the happy faces, the smiley faces, or the not so smiley faces. So if we look at representation and you've highlighted that it needs improvement. Maybe that community survey scorecard could give us some hints as to what we need to be doing differently to lift that. And you're just going to reserve comment until we've seen the community survey scorecard, aren't you?
No, I was just going to say it's a very subjective measure, and not everyone is kind enough to provide a reason for their score. But if they do provide a reason, then I'm sure we're gonna I know Councillor Gilmore is hot on this and has asked for this once or twice before, which is where we had, Dan has created that wonderful BI tool, but that's within an internal staff network. So I guess we could look to, this is Service and Performance Committee, Finance and Performance Committee, my apologies. So we could look to maybe do another deep dive within what's in there once we get the 12-month report.
Mayor Tracy, so just a reminder, councillors, this has been put in as a KPI to review for the Chief Executive. I have spoken with Carter and Grace around setting up a sort of a committee at some point to work with the elected on some sort of tactics around how we could potentially improve this. I do agree some of it's very subjective and there might not be a hell of a lot we can do, but at least we're going to work on something around this. I have said to the team, let's get through the LTP first as a priority, and then we'll bring this back afterwards and work out how we and what maybe we could do. I had one suggestion that we change the actual grading, so have happy at the bottom and extremely happy at the top, and all our problems go away with in terms of the scores. I say that in jest.
Okay, thanks for that, Brian. I think just the one that one of the ones that stood out for me and has been a bit of a concern for a while, and that was just around the footpaths and just, you know, watching that drop and knowing what our funding levels are and just what sort of a strategy we can. But that's not a conversation today, but that is one area that does give me some concern as well. Any further questions on that or comments? Okay, I've got the PwC information there. Does that want to read that? So can I have somebody move that we receive the third quarter performance report? Councillor Wallace, seconded Councillor Jones. All those in favour, please say aye. Know this inside and out and you sleep as well. Thank you for that. Thanks.
Good one. Really good performance.
Absolutely. Items. Is a look, it is a heavy meeting. It is an important one. We didn't do deep dives today because of the LTP, but for Sarah, I think I've got about 5 on the list for those. But if there's anything that anybody else wants a deep dive on, let me know, because I think it is important that we do take the community on this debt journey, understanding that, but actually adhering to what we're doing as well. And I guess the level of capital projects that we do have underway and getting through those. I've written some questions just around that waste that I'll come back to as well. Councillor Sutherland, did you have? I think further, I will close our meeting with a karakia. Kia tautanga maari e, ki runga e ngā iwi o te ao. Let your peace reign on all the people of the world. Thank you.
It's a big question.